film industry in the UK is largely centred around London and the South East, which is why I'm going somewhere that had a hand in producing all of these films: Cornwall. Cornwall is an English county on the southwest peninsula of the British Isles, but up until as recently as the 18th century, Cornwall was considered a separate jurisdiction from England, with its own government, the Stannary Parliament. I want to find out exactly how Cornwall is thought of as a nation state.
What's your experience of Cornish nationalism?
I have very little experience of Cornish nationalism, except in the early 1970s I was engaged regularly in conversation by Mr. Fred Trowell, who had recently set up Cornish Stannary Parliament.
Well, the Cornish Stannary Parliament is probably the oldest parliamentary system in existence on the planet today.
And they issued some notes to back up their parliament. There was a 5-shilling note, a 10-shilling note, a £1 note, a £5 note, and I believe a £10 note. I bought one from Fred Trowell, and this is a 5-shilling note. I didn't want to invest a lot of money in these notes.
Do you associate the Cornish Stannary Parliament with Cornish nationalism?
No, not at all. I mean, the Stannary Parliament is an institution that's actually founded in the Constitution of the United Kingdom. So it's not an issue of nationalism, although today, of course, that's the perception. It is a peculiarly it's an institution that affects a very specific area of the United Kingdom, and of course the system now today tends to look on people who advocate a return to Stannary institutions as being nationalist, but in actual fact that's not the issue. It's basically a legal situation. Today, people like myself who are members of the Stannary Parliament, we don't fulfil any public function, we don't receive public funds, so in that sense we're not a parliament in the Westminster sense, and so because we have this situation where we're not recognised, no public function, then the Parliament today acts more like a pressure group, with the focus being on not so much on the aspects of tin production, but on human rights issues. And so the Stannary Parliament today has been, over the last 10 to 15 years, has been trying to bring human rights cases to the domestic courts and to the international courts.
What was your experience in the bank when these notes were issued?
Well, a lot of shops in St Austell were accepting these notes issued by the Cornish Stannary Parliament in exchange for goods. So obviously we would have to find out if we could accept them in the bank for the credit of customers' accounts. And I wrote off to our head office about it, and they wouldn't give us any advice on it at that time. They said it was all being considered by the English government and the Bank of England, and they hadn't got a response, so we were left in the dark.
There's a very, very important promise that the government has actually made again to the Council of Europe, and it did so in 1998 also, when it signed and ratified what's known as the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. And since 1998, there's one minority that has been specifically excluded, only one, been specifically excluded from that the protection of that convention, and of course it's the Cornish.
Back in London, I asked a Lib Dem MP about the Convention for National Minorities.
The Council of Europe is a body which just about all countries in Europe are members of, distinct from the European Union. It's a body that looks at human rights issues and sort of equality issues, if you like, across the whole of the European continent. And there are a number of conventions and ideas that member states have signed up to, which just says that they commit to treating their citizens a certain way and standing up for their citizens. Now, the Framework Convention on National Minorities really was drawn up for the protection of indigenous minority groups. So, for example, if you look at Eastern Europe, there are communities of Hungarians maybe living in Romania or Bosnian Croats and so on. And so it's just ensuring that member countries look after those indigenous groups, give them the chance to perhaps have education in their own language, their own form of communication, that they're not prevented from celebrating their own particular cultural identity. Now, our government here in the UK has seen fit to interpret that, and they have signed up to the Framework Convention, as being a way of protecting ethnic minorities, ethnic minority groups. We already have a lot of legislation in this country looking after the rights of black and minority ethnic communities, and that's fantastic, it's absolutely right, and we should have that. But this, to me, is something different. This is the avenue which the government should be recognising groups, whether they be of Welsh identity, Irish, or so on, and also the Cornish, because I think that would then unlock many other rights for the Cornish as a people.
Well, assimilation is fine if people want it. But if they don't want it, then that's not so good. That's unacceptable, okay? So here we are at the moment that we've got a population here of, I don't know what, 500,000 plus. Now that's 500,000 people who aren't getting the benefit of an education that reflects the local culture, if you like, the local, peculiarisms, etc. You've got a press and media that's largely hostile to it. Now, were that situation to be improved, as it would be if the Cornish were included within this framework convention, then the Cornish would have access to their own press and media. You've got, SC4 in Wales. That's directly as a result of this framework convention. And they have their own newspapers with a peculiarly sort of Welsh slant on it. And really, if we had that here, then I think in general terms, far more of the population would actually want to be part of that and would want to develop that. And like I said, it's not because we think we're better, it's just simply because that, we live here, we're Cornish.
So what does this unique Cornish identity mean for Cornish film? The overwhelming majority of films shot in Cornwall have nothing whatsoever to do with Cornwall. Cornwall is used as a studio, its icons and landmarks reduced to sets. One such place is the infamous Eden Project.
I first heard about the Eden Project when it was being considered as a Millennium Project, and I knew Tim Smith from the Lost Gardens of Halligan. He'd come and lectured to various organisations that I'd asked him to, and so I asked him to come along and talk about his Millennium Project, and at that time he was in partnership with an architect from Bude who'd drawn up all the plans to use this disused, or it wasn't, at that time it wasn't disused, but it was coming to the end of its life as a china clay pit, and they thought they would use this feature to set up a Millennium Project. As it advanced, it became very much more complicated because they were having state-of-the-art biomes there, and they had to call in specialist architects and structural engineers, and the architect from Bude was gradually moved out.
When I visited Eden in early spring, the place was deserted. But it's okay, because when local people and tourists aren't visiting the project, it becomes a Hollywood action set for the latest blockbusters.
조용히 쫓겨! 알았어?
Charlestown is a small seaside village near St Austell, and is the only working square sail harbour in the world today. It is also a thriving film location.
It's often used by filming companies because it is virtually unchanged during the whole of the last century, and it retains its character. And what they do, they use it as a starting point, and then they erect their own boards as sets to change the appearance of the village into something quite different. And so that's how they use the port, and it's always being used for filming. It's very famous for a number of films.
So I took to the seas, the one place where I knew I would be safe.
So what does that very English institution in Westminster have to say about the lack of Cornish representation in film? Why are Cornish locations pillaged for the use of Hollywood blockbusters and English television shows? Cornishman Dan Rogerson is optimistic.
We have a great and innovative group of filmmakers looking at Cornish issues, also looking at using the Cornish language in film, and they've been award-winning films produced in Cornwall. We've sadly had our fingers burnt a little bit in that there was a studio project which received European funding, which was then later on found to be misusing some of that money and sort of went down in flames, which is a real shame, because I think if that project had been run properly, that could have been the start of something much bigger. But we have a lot of people doing creative courses at the university there in Cornwall, a lot of young people from Cornwall who go away and do those sorts of things. And because Cornwall is such a fantastic place to live, we are quite attractive to people from the creative side coming to Cornwall and wanting to set up home there and do things. So I do think that there's a lot there for Cornwall. And given the digital communication we have now, the fact that Cornwall has a sort of peripheral location geographically isn't so much a barrier anymore. You can do that, and you can upload stuff and send it around the world like that. So I think there's a lot that can be done there in the future too.